Trust the process. How does that make you feel? How can I help you? What does that mean to you? How's that working for you? Don't sweat the small stuff. Nothing good comes easy. Feel the feeling. Things a therapist might say. Yes! This is the Therapy Podcast. Two politically incorrect counseling professors and therapists who have many years of experience and wisdom and insight that they want to share. If you're a therapist, educator, counselor in training, or anyone interested in therapy, this is your epicenter for everything you should know. There are so many people in the world going through extreme mental and emotional issues, and we want to spotlight all the things we believe that work and the things that don't. They are wise sages, caring, intelligent, and are leaders in mental health counseling. The Therapy Podcast. And here they are, Drs. Martin Wesley and David Whittinghill.
Welcome to another edition of the Therapy Podcast. This is Dr. Martin Wesley, and I have our primary guest, host, Dr. Whittinghill. How are you, David?
I'm fine, Marty. Glad to be here.
But we also, and I don't know if it's primary, secondary, whatever, you guys have been almost guests for us, host again with us now for quite some time. So again, I think we need to have four politically incorrect people. With Dr. Laura Schmuldt.
Hello.
Are you doing? Hi, Laura. And Dr. Gerald Juhnke. How are you?
It's a delight to be here. Thanks, Marty.
Yeah. I was thinking about, to just get started, I was just thinking about our last podcast, and I would say that we hit a nerve with our profession, with counselor education. I think we have 300 downloads of that podcast within, a very short time. And I think we've been getting some feedback. I think we're getting feedback from both sides of the issue. Sort of reminds me that maybe we're on the right side of this in the sense that we're sort of in the middle. We're listening to people. We're throwing cautions, but we're also, throwing our concerns also about, again, both sides of the issue, I would say.
Well, I think you've handled it masterfully because we've had people that absolutely disagree and people that are very much saying we haven't done enough. So you've managed those two groups very well.
Well, I also want to throw out to Jerry, I appreciate your comments and some of these emails that's been going back and forth too, Jerry. We've been trying to treat it like we're therapists and trying to help individuals, but it seems like some people just want to throw gasoline on issues.
Yes. And I think the most important thing is, number one, for me, I was ignorant related to what was going on, and to just be able to listen what Aaron was talking about and understand better some of the concerns that he had. So I think as any therapist, any counselor, the idea is to start off with listening. I think that really is helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. And truly listening, I mean, with respect. And it seems like some people have made judgments prior to him just because of, some of his posts online or something without listening. I don't know. Well, we have a new topic today. I'm looking forward to talking about it. And we have Dr. Eric Beeson with us. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here to chat a little bit about counselor ed and our profession and where we're hopefully going in the future. And sounds like you all had a thrilling podcast last time that, got a lot of conversation going. And that's good about podcasts. We get a lot of conversations going. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, Eric, tell us a little about yourself. I mean, in case people don't know, I think you're in sort of my part of town, or my past, anyways, being in close to Kentucky, but right over the border. So.
Yeah. I'm in West Virginia right now. I'm a professor and chair of the counseling department at Marshall University. Been there about 2 years. We are a fully digitally delivered program as of last spring. Our history was, traditionally on-ground program. A few years before COVID, they went to multiple sites, multiple delivery methods, and they collected data. And throughout COVID, they collected data. And when I got there, we got to assess that data and decide what we were going to do post-COVID. And the decision grounded in that data was to move fully remote and to keep that digital transformation going. So I've been lucky enough to be there in the 2 years of kind of making that transition and making sure we have the infrastructure and the process and the resources in place. So you can imagine we were thrown a bit of a curveball when CACREP released Policy A.2.e, requiring two, I believe they say in-person, same geographic area, same physical location, something along those lines, to close any loophole in terms of what that might have meant. So yeah, we were kind of caught off guard, as were many, I think, in similar positions, and felt like it was important to have this conversation.
Well, thanks, Eric. I appreciate that for introducing what we're going to talk about today. By the way, I should mention that we also have another guest that just joined us, and that's Dr. Matt Buckley. Glad to have you, Matt.
Good to be here.
Yeah, Matt. And I mean, it's a little about you. Where are you at? Just remind us.
I am working at Rocky Mountain University, which is located in Provo, Utah. It's an online counseling program, and I've been working there for about 3 years. And that's where I'm at currently.
Excellent. And I know you've been a CACREP site leader for some time. I know that you've also been involved with synchronous and asynchronous type programs, and so I'm sure you can contribute quite a bit to the conversation. So,
sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah. So, okay, just a reminder, as Eric just mentioned, what we're talking about now relates to a CACREP policy that was implemented. I think we heard about it a little over a year ago, and it's Policy A.2.e. And there was also some guiding statements related to that, which I'm sure we'll get to. But let me just read that policy, and then let's talk about it. But I think this is the way it reads: beginning July 1st, 2026, programs, regardless of program delivery method, require and deliver an in-person synchronous experience to observe and assess counseling skills and professional dispositions for all students at least 2 points throughout the student's program of study, of which one occurs prior to the practicum. That's what we're talking about, guys. So Eric, I know you've been you're the one that reached out about this. I know there's a lot of concerns on your part, but my understanding, I mean, you've been actually working with several programs that have concerns about this.
Yeah. I think ironically, it's in their guiding statement, CACREP says that they listened to conversations on CESNET about concerns that emerged during COVID, and that was part of their, I guess, data collection effort to create the need for this policy. So kind of ironically, when the policy got released, people were kind of concerned about it, and they started having conversations on CESNET about it. And I engaged in those conversations. And out of that, there's been a group of impacted programs, and we've been meeting to kind of just have a space to share our confusion, have a place to talk about our options. And if this policy continues to be what it is, try to figure out what we're going to do to create a meaningful experience for our students, because there's a couple really common themes amongst programs. Many of us are small rural programs. We have low tuitions, not having a and let me say on the front end, we don't disagree with residencies as a good practice. What we disagree with is it being a forced practice, I believe, because all of our data from our comprehensive assessment plans have suggested that residencies were not needed as long as we had good assessment practices otherwise. And I think all of us have that same story. Our assessment data led us to make this decision. It was a strategy that we used to meet other CACREP standards, like our plans to recruit and retain a diverse student and faculty body. And this was a strategy to do all of those things. So in a way, this policy is forcing us to go against other policies and other standards. So we're kind of reeling with what are we going to do to make this a meaningful experience, with the question being, we don't want to do anything that's redundant to what we already do. And many of the residency models that we know of would be redundant with what we already do. So we're trying to figure out, how can we create an in-person, same geographic location experience that's valuable and isn't an undue hardship on our students and our faculty?
I appreciate that. And going back to that, rationale for this guiding statement, I think that's very important. What I'm seeing are primarily the first bullet point for the rationale relates to they saw a change of programs that were caught off guard from COVID-19. So we're talking about programs that were not digitally delivered or synchronous, asynchronous programs whatsoever that were forced into that environment, and they saw that as a concern. Mm-hmm. Two, the second point really doesn't apply. They're just saying, hey, they're doing this based on the timing of the 24 standards coming out. And then the third is there, like you mentioned, and I want to read that because to me that's really important. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we all have some comments here, but vital statistics survey data, comments from stakeholders at CACREP table talks at ACES, information from CISNET Post indicating that not having in-person contact between faculty and students with their peers have resulted in dispositional deficiencies, which has necessitated putting students on remedial plans. To me, this is, where is our research? I'm just wondering, I don't know. David, I know you've been in the research realm with, your past for quite some time. I'm just wondering, are we really saying that we're just listening to anecdotal evidence from CISNET Post?
That's what's bothering me the most about this whole thing, is that we didn't take the time to gather the data, to do a needs assessment and reach out to all the programs and gather the data to find out if these things actually exist. It sounds like it's just word of mouth at this point.
Yeah, and again, coming from your past experience, I know, Matt, you've been working in that realm too, as far as NBCC. Needs assessments, you're talking about, if I remember correctly, we're talking about tens of thousands of people that you would get feedback from to do the needs assessment for NBCC testing, as an example.
That's exactly right.
And so, yeah, when you're delivered, you delivered evidence based on all those surveys. There was significant, you knew what kind of theoretical approaches people were coming from. You knew what setting they're in. And again, you had all the data from the tests themselves about how well they're doing and based on some of those demographic information. And then here we are listening to CISNET Posts and using that as rationale for a change in policy.
And, Marty, I don't want to jump ahead, but I find myself wondering, are these concerns, these concerns like talks at ACES and students needing remediation, are those things specific to COVID or to online education in and of itself?
It's a good point. Again, it's not really explained. And I got to admit, and maybe this is a time, maybe this is not, that we get into this, but, I see we have primarily three different delivery models. And again, I would say it's a continuum based on those three different models. There's many hybrid approaches on all of those. But, Laura, you and I are both involved in a program that's fully synchronous, and we call it Live Online. Literally, we meet with our students, every week. And depending on how many classes, maybe several times a week that we meet with them, and we model for them. I'm engaged very seriously with my students, that often, I would argue, has even superior components, not entirely, to even on-ground programs. And I can go into the detail of what those might mean, but and I'm not knocking, and I would say the superior model is in person, but I would argue that there are some advantages to live online synchronous programs. For example, I'll throw one out just as an example, and that is that they are not coming to a lab setting that's in a counseling program on a campus. Mm-hmm. I am seeing my students. I am seeing them in their natural habitat, if I would say it. I'm seeing them in their own state, in their own setting, many times even across the seas and all over the country. So here I am, for example, I was working with one that was in Cambodia, and we're working with the sex trafficking going on there. He literally shifted his I remember his camera being shifted, and he's showing me a girl in a cage not far from me. Now tell me, in an online program where I can be in person in their program in Cambodia at that same time and experience what he was experiencing. You can't do that. That is something that a synchronous component, a synchronous live online program can offer that on campus or a asynchronous program could never offer. But to me, we're just throwing digital into a larger bowl and saying they're all equal. And that's just nonsense to me. Anyways, I spent too much time talking.
Well, it also sounds like somebody might have had an agenda. I don't know who brought this forward, but it certainly, we're an in-person classroom, CACREP accredited program. But it sounds like maybe somebody was attempting to address some kind of need that they perceived was present. And I agree with you. I don't know if CESNET or even responses at a SACES program would truly get at the core issues. So I don't know what the core issues were that they were trying to resolve, but I question if this is the right way to go.
I think that's been a question we've all had, is what was the actual problem?
Yeah.
And I think let's look at it from a research lens. Do we have a representative sample? I don't know, but it seems like we don't have a representative sample because all of the programs that are impacted by this seem to have a similar story and a similar reaction. And then also, this has a disproportionate impact on that group. They've written it in a way that it sounds universal. It says regardless of program delivery method, but let's be honest, just because it says that does not mean it's a universally applicable policy. This will disproportionately impact a segment of programs, a segment of faculty, and a segment of students, many of which, and I think, Marty, what you were mentioning is really important to the heart of some of our concerns, is it's for which students and what settings is this delivery method the most effective. And there are people that cannot access a traditional in-person on-ground learning environment for many reasons. Accessibility concerns, geographic barriers, you name it. So again, it's not a this or that is better or worse. It's for which students, for which faculty, for which people is each delivery method the most effective. And I think until we start answering those questions in a reliable and valid way, we're going to be making decisions based on the whim of our perception and CESNET discussions. And I'm really worried about how we not only react to current trends, but future trends if we're having regressive educational policies that seem to be pulling us a decade back in terms of what education writ large or digital education has looked like in the past decade. So yeah, I think I'm trying not to get too paranoid. Gerald, as you mentioned, what was the motive? But it's easy to think about some potential motives if I let my paranoid brain go in that direction.
Well, CACREP is my accreditation body, and the people on the CACREP board are people who I respect, and I really want to believe in them. And I also question, it sounds like there was another concern that folks were trying to address, and I just don't know what that concern truly was and how this addresses that concern. Maybe there are other ways to address these concerns. I just don't know.
I wanted to piggyback on that, Gerald. I really appreciate that. Eric, I see myself with many of these on the screen today as old school. And I can remember when I was making the transition out of just a brick and mortar institution into an online program and thinking, what am I doing? How could you train counselors in such a high touch kind of way in which I've become accustomed to? And over the years, I realized that you absolutely can. And my hunch is that there is that sense of like, I totally reflect what Gerald is saying about CACREP. The people that work for CACREP, I love and respect. I've worked with them for more than 2 decades. It's just been a great experience. But I do suspect that there's this thinking about if the perception now of these new 2024 standards is such that we're dropping the ball and we're not attending to what is, and it's very specific. It's about assessing counseling skills and professional dispositions. If we've dropped, then we automatically go all the way to the extreme that we're just a diploma mill churning out mindlessly, graduate candidates that are not well vetted. And I have evolved in my thinking. I think you're reflecting that too, Eric. The more that post-COVID, the more that we've been doing this in an online format, I think the better that we've gotten at it. Mm-hmm. So I'll just say this too. I just came away last week from one of our in-person academic residencies, which was focused on skill building. What I think is very powerful about the experience is online students getting together and being able to interact with each other in a physical space. They feel it. They feel on fire. They feel energized. They feel, kind of a new resolve. Things are clear for them. But in terms of counseling skills and professional dispositions, there was no difference. What they did there, they did online, and we could detect that as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, the other thing, Matt, is that, we have site visits. In other words, CACREP sends site teams to our locations, or I don't know how they do it for online programs, but, they come and visit, they look at our programs, they look at our syllabi, they talk to our students, they talk to our faculty. So it would seem that these reviews, we have a midterm review that occurs every year. We've got materials that we forward. Are they saying that none of that count? I'm just asking the question. Are they saying, okay, that's really great stuff, but we don't believe it's really happening, so that's why we want these in-person program? It just doesn't make sense to me. It's illogical to me in that regard, because CACREP does a great job related to site teams that show on up, and they do a wonderful job, and they find things that sometimes I overlook, and you go, wow, we didn't do that, because they're looking at things from a broader point of view. I get lost in the trees sometimes. So to have them do these things, I think we've got a lot of safety nets there where it wouldn't necessarily mean that we have to have such in-person gatherings. And I think that has a great potential to influence our programs and what we're doing and our students.
Yeah.
And Gerald, what what a great point. The online programs have the same CACREP visits, have site visitors coming out, sitting in online classes, meeting with students. All of those same checks and balances are in place. And, when I think about my biggest concern is when I think of various students I've known over the years, like a student who cannot travel because they're a single mother to a child with disabilities that warrant, that it's just not possible to have a caregiver fill in, or somebody who's on National Guard duty, maybe they're going to have to be there that same weekend. Those are the kind of stories that come to mind on my heart, and I imagine it's the same for many of you as well.
But imply that it's only good for folks who can afford these in-person programs. So I just don't get it. It's not a match for me. I apologize. I must be missing something here.
Well, and I think and again, I agree. It hits, strongest with our students, but I would also argue that it definitely impacts programs like Eric has mentioned. And I'm thinking of a program, that I used to be part of with, let's say, Lindsey Wilson College, which now just turned into university. I just gave them a plug. But anyways, they're in the middle of the state, very far away from any major airports. And same for you, I'm sure, Eric, in Huntington. I'm sure there's an airport there, but it's not exactly a international one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's easy for us to get caught in debates about online versus on-ground superiority, residency versus not residency, but I feel like we just miss the mark if we get into those debates. Because Matt, you mentioned, if we want to know the outcomes of residencies, let's study the outcomes of residencies and determine, is it knowledge and skills, or is it sense of community? Is it self-efficacy? Is it something else? But let's look at the reliability and the validity in our assessment measures and look at the outcomes. And I'd actually be an advocate for more strict, rigid outcomes in our CACREP accreditation standards rather than procedural standards that force people to do a specific type of delivery method. So I think, Matt, to your point, if the concern is that we as a profession are dropping the ball, then let's look at how we're dropping the ball and let's develop better strategies so we don't drop the ball anymore. But it seems like we've decided, again, all due respect to everybody that was involved in making this policy, we're just ignorant. We don't know how the policy came to be except for what's been published. So we're going to try to give the utmost respect to that, but also just we're left kind of scratching our heads about how did it come to be? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And collectively, how can we try to solve that? And I'll give you one example. As a program, we wanted to have more real observational experiences of our students doing the work at more than 2 points over the curriculum. So we were entering into relationships with some technology vendors. We were getting ready to roll out this is a sidebar conversation, but AI-generated client simulations in every single course, in addition to in addition to peer role plays, in addition to client session video recordings and live observations. But now we're forced into a position where we have to make resource decisions. And CACREP's position is going to be, you can still do all of those things. But the reality is we can't always do all of those things unless we increase tuition and fees, which again forces us to go against other standards of recruiting and retaining a diverse student body. And if our comprehensive assessment plan says, residency is not needed, we're going to listen to our assessment data, but this makes us go against that assessment data. And I think that's really where we just see the we see the conflicts that are presented to us. And again, we fully intend to comply if we need to. We would just rather have a more open dialogue as a profession about, I think, Matt, to your question, what's the problem we're trying to solve?
Two politically incorrect counseling professors and therapists with never-ending experience and wisdom who are proud to be politically incorrect. You're listening to the Thera Podcast. Now, back to your hosts, Drs. Martin Wesley and David Whittinghill.
You know, when I think of for one, I can't help it, but when, you know, you're from Marshall and what's that phrase? We are Marshall.
Yeah.
And then I took from what you were saying, Jerry, is we are CACREP, very loudly. And why? Because it is our accrediting body. It's us. It is the counselor ed, and who or what is counselor ed? It's us. And while they were saying that they're listening to CISNET posts and some of these other forums, this is also a forum. This is also a place where we're discussing that. And I hope that they're listening.
What strikes me about all this is the ACA ethical guideline of doing no harm. And what I see here is a policy that would do some harm to students who do not have the financial means to attend a in-person session.
It's a good point.
Well, and I'll just say, having worked for about 11 years with Walden University, the residencies that we would have, because it was a for-profit, huge corporate for-profit model, I mean, literally, when we would do residencies, not for just the counseling program, but other programs, social work and public policy programs, et cetera, they would literally rent out the Hyatt and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars making that the campus for that particular week. Program you're talking about, Eric, can't even begin to kind of touch that at all. You have to be super creative about how it is you're going to do something like that. But all of things we've been talking about in terms of geographical limitations and financial limitations for students make it prohibitive for sure.
Well, again, I would agree with what you said, Eric, too, about not necessarily debating the models per se, because our assessment data should talk about that. But residencies are really almost required in some sense for an asynchronous program. But again, we're not distinguishing these hybrid models. We're not distinguishing a synchronous model, which we're meeting with our students in real time every week. I can sit here in my background and do with my students and model counseling behavior. It's not, a recorded version of anything. It's literally modeling that.
Yeah. And that's where, maybe we haven't done a good job in the field of our scholarship related to this, and just what are our models of digitally delivered programs. And I don't even like the false dichotomy of the two. It's because even an accredited program as an on-ground program can still have digitally delivered elements that are really effective, and vice versa. And I wish we would get out of that a little bit more again. And if we really want to get serious about it, let's talk about some outcomes that matter to us and our students and the clients that we're going to serve someday. And let's build an accreditation model that drives those outcomes rather than, drives a specific delivery method. And again, frankly, I don't want to be too critical, but it does show preferential treatment to certain programs and it disadvantages others. And I think we have to call attention to that in some degree, even though it was clearly written in a way to give the appearance of a universally applicable standard. The impact of that is not so.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is even the language sometimes we use to describe this. I struggled with this years ago when I was working for, or not working for, but I was the chair at Kentucky Licensed Professional Counselors, and when I was a member and chair there. But using words like, okay, so it says, regardless of program delivery method, require and deliver an in-person synchronous experience. We had to somewhat describe it sometimes breathing the same air kind of language, because really, I could argue it is an in-person synchronous experience to even be in a video. We're in that right now where we actually are seeing each other in our own environments in that way.
Yeah. Well, and they do use that language, breathing the same air, in my conversations. And I think from a procedural standpoint, it's important to have some things out there too. When this was first released, I think many of us were under the impression that they were giving it a good faith reevaluation after people had reached out with concerns. And we thought they were going to define in-person synchronous differently and allow for this kind of synchronous engagement that we're doing right now. But in fact, the guiding statement they released did everything possible to close that loophole and to make it very, very clear what the intention is. So, and I think that's the sad part to me. If they would have just left the policy as it was and allowed any synchronous experience to count, I don't think I'd have the same concerns, because that, you mentioned harm, David. We mentioned disproportionate impact. Those things wouldn't be there. But I think this is a call on us as a profession to answer some of these questions about. And Marty, you mentioned, I don't even know if our colleagues know about the different diversity within digitally delivered programs, the frequency of synchronous to asynchronous, the evolution of competency-based models, the evolution of flipped classroom models. There is all of this to tease apart and discuss and debate and push us forward in educational theory and delivery. But I fear that this is going to make us, I know it's making us devote a ton of resources in a direction that we did not plan to go, because our data did not lead us in that direction.
And I would say there's guidance, there's guiding principles, I think, on certain constructs in which we work. For example, how many hours should there be direct and indirect learning in any classroom? Some kind of credit hour, compliance that we all deal with. But in this setting, for example, they're just saying, do it. So literally what I'm seeing is, in fact, I'll even read this second point on foundation principles. It says universities continue to have autonomy to determine the length and physical location that university staff, and on and on and on. Literally, they're not even saying how long it's supposed to be. We can literally meet them in the airport, have a discussion, see these, some kind of interactional experience, and send them back on their way and meet the standard.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of graduate training programs that are similar to counseling. I'm thinking of ones that have a more medical component where there's things we'd have to see. We'd have to see somebody, I don't know, drawing blood or whatever the case may be. And others maybe along like business programs, and where there's really nothing to put your eye on per se. Is there like an interdiscipline or looking at various disciplines? Is there outcome data on the power of the in-person residency? And we definitely know it sets students on fire and it's good for relationship building. But other than that, is there anyone know of anything?
I don't.
Yeah, from the data I've seen, there is no difference. That's the point, though, unless we have that should be embedded in our policies. Is it based on research? This is what we found, not based on CISNET posts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we're missing, the data.
I don't think I'd base a whole hell of a lot on CISNET posts.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, you say that, and yet now again, I rarely go to it, which is Sysnet D. I don't know. Again, some of us don't even know what it really is, but because we mainly just get these posts, through our email. But Sysnet D is available, and we can all go on there. But what probably the most, at least viewed and probably discussed on Sysnet D, it's this policy right here. So if CACREP is concerned about the outpouring of committed people in our program, then it seems like that would be on their forefront to discuss. But
I confess not. I kind of burned out during the pandemic around Sysnet, so I have not been a viewer since that. But one of the programs that I consult for, who is striving for CACREP accreditation, the liaison mentioned to me that she was in talks with CACREP getting clarification about what constituted educational partners, for example, supervisors, and the idea of a supervisor having an in vivo live supervision where they're observing the interaction of a student in real time, breathing the same air with a particular client, and making that particular assessment and having that count towards this policy requirement. It seems like a lot of acrobatics in being able to do that. But so she is in the process of trying to clarify that too. And I don't know where that status is, but I wanted to throw that out, that was something that had not occurred to me, that she was further inquiring about.
Yeah. Eric, I think you were sort of saying, indicating through your body language that others are not saying, but that you've sort of gone down that route and it seems like it's been closed. But
in my experience, they have closed everything other than being faculty, staff, and students in the same room, breathing the same air.
Yeah.
Anything short of that will not meet the standard, is what I've been told. And again, if that's the direction we're going to go, that's the direction we're going to go. It seems like that's the direction we're going to go. So, it's a shame that we're going to spend resources that were slated to go in one direction in another area that we think is going to have, it'll have good outcomes. We'll make it a great experience. We'll do our best to do that. But I think we're struggling to find out what is the thing that we can't do online that requires us to be breathing the same air. And that question is really hard for me to answer. There's a few that we've come up with as a faculty and as a group, but they're very small. And I don't think they align with the intentions of the policy. But I think that's the closest that we can get to make something valuable. And I'd love to hear, what does our field think about what can't we do online, rather than, oh, that's not something we can do online. And I think we haven't answered that either.
Technology does have a way of advancing much faster than policies.
We've talked with some other potential programs about doing some joint residencies, and we think that might be a useful experience, because at least they'd get exposed to other people that they wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. Maybe there's even some value in validity of assessments, of being assessed by other faculty at other programs. Now there's tons of FERPA-related risks there and things that we'd have to iron out. But, we're trying to think of creative options. Maybe it's a service learning experience somewhere. But then again, we're forcing people to expend a lot of resources to do a service learning experience, which have great outcomes. But again, are they necessary for every single student, for every single person that's going to be a professional counselor? And I think that's the question that's yet to be answered. Matt, I'm glad you described the scale of resources that a larger institution might have to put on residencies. And again, I think that's a really thank you for sharing that. I just think it's a really important perspective to keep in mind that it's not just creating a great educational experience, it's creating a logistical experience too. We've all coordinated conferences, right, in our professional associations, and it's essentially coordinating a conference. And if you're a program that admits students 3 or 4 times a year, you're going to end up doing that 3 or 4 times a year, probably. You could probably get away with it twice, but still, you're going to be running 2 conferences every year with limited admin staff, with limited faculty time. And again, that's the resource expenditure that I think is overlooked in this policy.
Well, and Eric, I'll add to that too. What's ironic about it is that sort of big, what I would call a big show, is not really geared towards what residencies are supposed. It's about marketing, about a lot of other things that are not really connected to the residency experience.
Right.
Residency experience is about retention, not about necessarily skills and dispositional assessment. So, yeah.
I'm glad you said that, Matt, because my experience, and again, I don't mean to put, I won't put a name to a program, but, some of them are meeting and deputizing other schools, other schools like Indiana University, to do their residencies. And you're right. Some of them are, in hotels or something like that. Is that really what we're looking for? And you're right. As far as it's more of a marketing than I saw than anything from the ones that I saw. And I would also argue that I had the experiences that I had, at least, had very little time with my own specific program, and were much more in a larger group with multiple programs and guests and so forth that often had nothing to do with my programming.
Yeah. And I was in a primarily asynchronous only master's program in rehabilitation counseling. Loved my program, got a lot out of it. We had 2-week-long residencies. I was lucky enough that I could stay on someone's couch and I didn't have to afford a hotel, and I could scrape together enough pennies to pay for parking. And I find myself to be pretty privileged, and it was still a struggle to get a week off of work to pay for a hotel room I could not do, but I had a friend there that I could stay on their couch. So those are the stories, again, coming from a privileged perspective, it was hard for me. And I think that story, I think, Laura, you mentioned a couple really specific scenarios where that's the hardship. That's the undue hardship that I see. And again, for what end, for what outcome? And I think this is where I would like us to expand on what's the model of a residency. Is it getting 300 people in a lecture hall and listening to a lecture? If that's it, I would say there is no reason I cannot do that over a computer. I do not want to spend money just to get in a lecture hall and listen to someone. The other model is predominantly triadic role plays, peer-to-peer role plays. Maybe if your program has a lot of experience or a lot of resources, you get some standardized clients and some standardized patients. But I mean, what's your all's experience? Most of mine is it's peer-to-peer role play. And if that's the model, I don't know. I think we got a lot to do in terms of simulation learning writ large, but if peer-to-peer role play is the primary model, I worry about that as well.
Well, no, you bring up a very good point, Eric. Peer-to-peer role play has its place in skills classes and so forth, but again, which is far superior, a recording of a real client in a real situation being really vulnerable in that place, or a peer-to-peer interaction about, how they can best, juggle the, struggles of grad school. No. The recording is far superior.
Yeah.
With a real client.
So we get back to to me, let's have the debate about reliability and validity. Like, let's get serious about, like, what are we trying to measure and how are we doing it? What are we trying to instill in the knowledge, skills, and dispositions of those that we serve? And like, let's get serious about that conversation. And I'll feel more hopeful. Again, I've been a CACREP supporter my entire career. I will still support CACREP, even with this disagreement. And I want to push our field further to have what I would argue, as I'm hearing from you all, are some more meaningful conversations, not just about now, but about our future. Again, we got to demonstrate some outcomes real soon, or there will be other services take our place. But we're going to be in regressive training practices, debating that, it seems like, for the next year at least.
Is there any precedence for a decision like this coming out and based on feedback before the date of inception that the decision has been kind of pulled back or reconsidered, removed, anything like that?
I don't know the answer. That's a really good question. Yeah.
Don't know.
I hear rumors, but, I think they were before my time in the profession. I hear rumors that litigation has been floated in the past for certain policies, but I don't know if those are true. I just hear rumors.
Thanks, Eric.
Well, I would argue that it seems like this policy would have been in the standards, except they sort of fast-tracked it in a sense to be implemented, in the interim, after the policy or after the 2024 standards were already released. So there's a point where if they can make changes, in the interim, I would think they could resend or change it too.
And then I wonder if, social work and LMFT programs, marriage family therapy, if they're doing this too.
I don't know. Good question.
Yeah. And it'd be a great conversation with, CACREP representatives. Like, I feel so weird talking about CACREP as like an entity without them in the room, right? I wish that there was the opportunity, and maybe we'll have that at ACES. Maybe we'll have that at conferences, and maybe I haven't taken full advantage of the opportunities that we have. So I want to be humble. I want to be open. I want to be willing to be wrong in all this too.
Sure.
I just haven't found the answer, and I want to push back on my perception. So what's the alternative perspective, I guess? Let's prove ourselves wrong. And I've tried to do that. I just haven't come up with a good argument. So if anybody can do that, let's push back on one another.
Yeah. I think, and I think that goes to a lot of things. Now that you mention it, Eric, there's that humility that you just expressed, which I think goes a long ways. But then there's also sometimes, I don't know. Do we see more changes made based on angry people that are, political and social justice? I sometimes wonder if it's the angry person that gets more done. I don't know the answer to that, but I really, I don't know. What do you guys think? No one's going to touch that one, are they?
No, Marty.
I think we as traditional, we as therapists in general want to stay in that humble zone. And I think that serves us well. But unfortunately, just like it was with Michelle Obama and all in the past, where she would say, when they go low, we go high. Sometimes I do wonder if the results indicate that going low works, unfortunately. Not advocating for that by any means, guys.
We didn't take it that way. But I think you're right on target. The idea that being willing to listen to people and find out what they're talking about and understanding it, and then making a decision whether or not this makes sense or not, that seems most logical. And you can't listen to people if you're angry and you're shouting and you're not listening to what they're saying. you can come on really strong and it doesn't help because you don't understand what they're talking about. So I think sometimes people lose that. Think about domestic violence cases that we've all worked with. It's having people understand what the other person's looking for, what they want, and how we can figure out some common ground we can all work on. So for me, I don't think the loud person, although the old saying is what the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I don't think that that's really the answer sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No.
I think,
well said, Jerry.
Yeah.
Eric, the group that you've been meeting with or have ongoing discussions with, is there any kind of like action plan you could share with us?
Yeah, I think everybody's at their own phase of accreditation journey. Some are in their first application cycle and trying to figure out if they're even going to pursue accreditation now. Like, I think some programs, especially those in rural areas, this is kind of a deal breaker for them. Like, they created the digital delivery method for the people in their state that couldn't come to their campus. So now if they have to come to their campus, it's kind of like, why are we building the digital delivery method now? And I think others are going through reaccreditation right now. And I've heard fear of retribution. I'm going through reaccreditation right now, and I was honest with our site visit team about this is going to be one of our challenges in the next year is figuring this out. And it's not that we're trying to fight it for the sake of fighting it. I don't even think we're trying to fight it. I just think we want to have some conversation about it. And again, get back to the core question of what are we trying to solve and what's the most reliable and valid way to solve it. And then let's test it. Let's collect data. Let's evaluate it. But I didn't intend to make this a research agenda item for me. So I didn't intend to make this the focus of our next academic year either. And that's where, again, there's real resource expenditure changes. And, if it was a smaller policy that didn't have such an impact, I'd be like, sure, make it outside the standards revision process. And I know that they mentioned timing being the reason it didn't go through the standards revision process. But again, we've been doing digital delivery long before. Like, if these concerns were coming from people doing digitally delivered programs, we would have heard them already, which leads me to believe that the concerns were coming from people that weren't doing digitally delivered programs. So then, if that's the representative sample that they use, like, let's build our training, like, let's educate people about how to assess knowledge, skills, and dispositions remotely. Marty, you mentioned a lot of stories that really spoke to me about when people come to residencies, are they on their best behavior? Do they come in their most pristine disposition? Like, I don't know. What's the most naturalistic environment for me to observe knowledge, skills, and dispositions? Is it a hotel banquet hall? Or is it their home office where I can see, I don't know, liquor bottles in the background, or I can see who knows what I'm going to see in the background. But and it's not to say that I'm surveilling students, but I think it speaks to this idea of like, what's reliable and valid assessment? And I think that's a really important question in all of this. Is not just residency or not residency, but it's what's reliable and valid assessment in counselor education look like? And that's a question I'd love us to spend our research agendas and our resources trying to answer.
No, you make a good point, Eric. But I got to admit, when you said, who knows what you're going to see in the background, an image came in my head of this student and her naked husband that was walking in the background. So yes, that's a good point. But no, what I would say, Eric, is that we have the data. We should have the data. We have been doing what the counseling competencies revised for the longest time now. Most programs are probably using some version of that. And these are all probably measured by independent counseling supervisors throughout the entire country that we could probably come together and have a huge data set where we could see if there's differences between program delivery models. And I have a feeling again, I don't know. I don't have the data, but I have a feeling we're going to see that there's not a whole lot of difference.
Yeah.
We got the data.
We do have the data. It's just a matter of collecting it instead of using, SysNet Post.
Yeah. And even like this is kind of speaks to what's the real outcome. Like thinking about I'm on our state licensure board, and we were just talking about, do we want to start to analyze our ethical complaints and see if there are trends? Like if there were trends that there were more ethical complaints against graduates from digitally delivered programs and those not, then I'd say that's a problem we need to solve, but I've not seen that. So I'm sorry to keep kind of going back to this idea of like what the problem is we're trying to solve, but and really what are the outcomes we're trying to demonstrate, I think is a question too. And Marty, you mentioned some standardized measures that we could all use. NCE and CMHCE have their own sort of strengths and limitations in terms of what they measure and what they can't. But part of my research agenda is in simulation learning right now and really expanding what simulation learning can do at a broad level at like assessment that can take place so frequently that we have richness and we have convergence and we have triangulation and we have all of these really important statistical and phenomenological outcomes at many, many more points than just 2 times across the curriculum. So that's where I hope we move.
No, I really appreciate this conversation. And to me, one thing that, again, I know we need to close out real soon, but CACREP, for doctoral programs, I think require good research. And I think that's should be a component of any accreditation model for any doctoral program. And yet, the model that they're describing has nothing to do with good research. And to me, that's the concern, that they're modeling something that they're telling us. In other words, they're saying, do as I say, not as I do. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the concern. So,
yeah. This is too cynical, but what if I wrote this in my comprehensive assessment plan that I sent in with my self-study? I just wonder, how would that be reviewed?
A good point. Very good point. Yeah, that you listen to SysNet Post and and everyone said it was great, and that should be good enough for CACREP.
Yeah.
So. Well, thank you, Eric. I really appreciate you bringing this out and representing, some of these programs that are struggling with this, especially in rural areas. Because again, I think there's similar concerns with urban areas, but there's an additional component for those that are not close to an airport that does add potentially another $1,000, $2,000 for every residency for those in rural areas. And I would argue, and I'm an Appalachian person myself, that they often get left out of the conversation. And thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. This is a good talk.
Thanks so much, Marty. Thanks, Eric, for sharing.
Yeah. Good to see you again, Laura.
You too, Eric.
You've been listening to the Thera Podcast. If you're a therapist, educator, a counselor in training, or anyone interested in therapy, this is your epicenter for everything you should know. Dr. Martin Wesley and Dr. David Whittinghill are counseling professors and therapists who have endless knowledge and wisdom. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten something from it. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can find our website at www.therapodcast.com. Find the show on all the major podcast platforms. And to email Dr. Wesley, send it to wesleyphd@gmail.com. Take care and see you next time on the Thera Podcast.